أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سورة أنزلناها وفرضناها وأنزلنا فيها آيات بينات لعلكم تذكرون. الزانية والزاني فاجلدوا وكل واحد منهما مئة جلدة ولا تأخذكم بهما رأفة في دين الله إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر وليشهد عذابهما طائفة من المؤمنين. الزاني لا ينكح إلا زانية أو مشركا والزانية لا ينكحها إلا زاني أو مشرك وحرم ذلك على المؤمنين. والذين يرمون المحصنات ثم لم يأتوا بأربعة شهداء فأجلدوهم 80 جلدة ولا تقبلوا لهم شهادة أبدا وأولئك هم الفاسقون. إلا الذين تابوا من بعد ذلك وأصلحوا فإن الله غفور رحيم. والذين يرمون أزواجهم ولم يكن لهم شهداء إلا أنفسهم فشهادة أحدهم 4 شهادات بالله إنه لمن الصادقين. والخامسة أن لعنة الله عليه إن كان من الكاذبين. ويذرو عنها العذاب أن تشهد 4 شهادات بالله إنه لمن الكاذبين. والخامسة أن غضب الله عليها إن كان من الصادقين. ولولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته وأن الله تواب حكيم. إن الذين جاءوا بالإفك أصبة منكم لا تحسبوه شرا لكم بل هو خير لكم لكل أمر منهم ما اكتسبت من الإثم والذي تولى كبره منهم له عذاب عظيم. لولا إذ سمعتموه ظن المؤمنون والمؤمنات بأنفسهم خيرا وقالوا هذا إفك مبين لولا جاءوا عليه بأربعة شهداء فإذا لم يأتوا بالشهداء فأولئك عند الله هم الكاذبون ولولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته في الدنيا والآخرة لمسكم فيما أفسدتم فيه عذاب عظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم. Recite another salawat, inshallah. We will have a Persian poetry. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك درد بسیار مداوا گریه ارث جامانده زهرا گریه روزها ناله و شبها گریه آب میخورد ولی با گریه آب میخورد ولی با گریه گریه بر آب وضویش میریخت خون دل بر سر و رویش میریخت. Imam Sajjad was crying for everything that he was seeing. گریه بر شاه شهیدان خوب است گریه بر کشته عریان خوب است گریه بر دامن طفلان خوب است گریه بر آن لب و دندان خوب است خواسته هر سحرش گریه کند در فراق پدرش گریه کند گریه بر ناله آن مادرها علی لای لای گریه بر ناله آن مادرها گریه بر گریه آن دخترها بابا صورتم بابا گریه بر گریه آن دخترها گریه بر غارت انگشترها گریه بر وا شدن مجرها، رنگ مهتاب زمینش میزد، دیدن آب زمینش میزد. گریه بر ناقه نشسته سخت است، گریه با پیکر خسته سخت است، گریه با بال شکسته سخت است، گریه با کردن بسته گریه با کردن بسته سخت است. گریه خوب است که هر شب باشد، گریه بر چادر زینب باشد. آن که راه است پیاده نکشی، تشنه را بر لب باده نکشی، طفل را این همه ساده نکشی، ذبح را ذبح را آب نداده نکشی، هیچ کس آب به گودال نبرد، پدرم ذبح شد و آب نخورد. آمد و دید تنی افتاده، کشته بی کفنی افتاده، شه بی پیرهنی افتاده، پاره پاره بدنی افتاده. حسین جان، 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 حسین جان. Please recite the salawat by Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Muhammad and Ali Muhammad salawat.
तस्वीर गम बना है मैदान करबला, तस्वीर गम बना है मैदान करबला, गोरो कफन बिना है शहीदान करबला, जलती हुई रेती पे बिखरे हुए लाशें, इस हाल में सोए हुए मेहमान करबला, अकबर और अली असगर लौटे नहीं रन से, जुल्मों सितम से गुल हैं चिरागान करबला, पानी को तरसते प्यासे ही चल बसे, अब चैन से सोते हैं शहीदान करबला, लाशें बगैर सर की फरियाद करती हैं, लाशें बगैर सर की फरियाद करती हैं, जुल्मत कदा बना है बियाबान करबला। गुर्बत की इंतहा के लाशें हैं बेकफन, वारिस नहीं है उनका गरीबान करबला। रौंदी हुई लाशों का मंजर न पूछिए, हैरत से देखते हैं तायरान करबला। आले नबी घिरी जुल्मत की घटाओं में, आले नबी घिरी जुल्मत की घटाओं में, गुर्बत बेकसी में यतीमान करबला। जलते हुए खेमे और परेशान बीबियां, जलते हुए खेमे और परेशान बीबियां, शोलों से हुआ खाक खियाबान करबला। खूने हुसैन सी सिंची करबल की जरजमीन, खूने हुसैन से सिंची करबल की जरजमीन, पाकीज़ा हुआ खून से बियाबान करबला। जन्नत की ये जन्नत की ज़मीं ये हसरत से कह रही है, जन्नत की ज़मीं ये हसरत से कह रही है, ऐ काश हम भी होते मैदान करबला। है कारवान जुल्म में बेपर्दा बीबियां, है कारवान जुल्म में बेपर्दा बीबियां, साबिक रहे सफर हैं असीरान करबला। सलवात।
Everybody has recited the Quran and the Muslim. Now, Salawat, I'd like to invite the Sheikh for the Majlis. Salawat. Salawat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولاهم عن قبلتهم التي كانوا عليها قل لله المشرق والمغرب يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وما جعلنا القبلة التي كنت عليها إلا لنعلم من يتبع الرسول ممن ينقلب على عقبيه وإن كانت لكبيرة إلا على الذين هدى الله وما كان الله ليضيع إيمانكم إن الله بالناس لرؤوف رحيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. The topic that we started discussing last night was the topic of exploring the reasons behind Islamic rulings. Another title that we gave to this topic was the idea of asking why in Islam. And we started discussing this by touching on that fundamental characteristic that the human being has, that no other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to the same extent. That is a curiosity and a thirst for the truth. The human being never stops at simply seeing something happen in front of him. He always wants to dig deeper. He always wants to understand why. He wants to understand the reality behind what he is seeing. If he sees the apple fall from the tree, that's not just enough for him to see the apple fall from the tree. He wants to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And we said that the human being has this characteristic more than any other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this also presents itself when this human being is told about its religious duties, the different religious duties that it has. You're supposed to pray 5 times a day. You are supposed to do wudu. You are supposed to do tayammum. This human being continues to ask why. What are the reasons behind all of these? What are the philosophy and the wisdom behind all of these different rulings? And so we said we have to understand what is Islam's perspective on this issue. Fundamentally, if I ask why when it comes to Islam, is this seen in a negative light or is this seen in a positive light? Is this a question I'm supposed to ask or is it a question I'm not supposed to ask? So in many other religions, you will ask this question and you will be reprimanded for asking this question because intellect and faith are two completely different things. They will tell you that if you believe in something, if you have faith in something, that's one realm of reality. Your intellect and what your mind understands is a completely different thing. Even if they don't mesh with one another, it doesn't really matter. In Islam, however, this idea of asking why, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't seem to reprimand people when they ask this question, because the angels raised this question to him when he was deciding to create Adam alayhi salam. And they had this conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in which they asked, Ya Allah, why are you creating this Adam? We do everything for you already. So what's the point of creating this other creation and making it so complicated? We don't need this other guy. We'll do everything for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never reprimanded them. He never did them of them. How dare you ask this question? Why would you ever ask this question? No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented to them how this human being was going to be different. And then we moved on to the seerah of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, and we also saw this in the seerah of Amirul Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. We also saw the same thing. Not only was the idea of asking questions okay, in fact, Ali ibn Abi Talib would sit on the minbar and he would say, Saluni qabla an tafqiduni. Ask me before you lose me. And of course, in history, different questions have been narrated as to what questions were actually presented to him. So this was a very common thing. So much so that books have been compiled in which the ahadith are speaking only about these whys. Why is this? Why is that the reasons and the wisdoms behind these rulings. And this book that I narrated or mentioned yesterday was the book of Ilal al-Shara'i', put together by the great famous scholar, Sheikh As-Saduq. You know, there's some scholars, they're scholars. There's some scholars, they're heavyweights. There's some scholars, if they weren't there, the Shia school of thought may have not come together. It's literature, yes? They put together the literature. They compiled the literature of the Shia school of thought. Sheikh As-Saduq is one of them. Sheikh al-Mufid is another one of those scholars. And there are many others, but these two stand out in a different way. So they have compiled books on this topic, thousands of ahadith in which the Imam is explaining why. Even today during the course, we're going through it. The reason behind wudu, the reason behind tayammum, so on and so forth. Some of the hadith we were narrating was from Ilal al-Shara'i'. So this was something that was seen in a positive light, generally. But we said in order to understand this better, we have to understand the two types of why. When someone asks why, there are two different types of questions that they are posing to us. Sometimes someone asks why, they want to see what is the hadith, what is the verse of the Quran that tells you to do this as part of Islam. Say you put turba when you pray. Why? You combine prayers. Why do you do that? He's not looking for some scientific fact. He wants to see where is the hadith that the Prophet said you are allowed to do this. Where's the verse of the Quran that says that you can, for example, do this? Yes, this is the first type of why. We said this first type of why, not only is it okay for you to ask this, it is necessary for you to ask this. Because if you don't, then the lines between culture and religion start to get blurred. Before you know it, you're doing things that are cultural and you assume they are religious because you never looked into what's the reason behind this. Where's the backing of it coming from? Where's the hadith or the verse of the Quran that tells us to do this? No, you were just doing it. And we said that Muslims fundamentally, if they don't ask this question, they will fall into two groups. And, you know, we have both groups in our communities. There are those who are extremely, easygoing. Everything is permissible. No, you can do anything you want. It's not a problem. Everything is halal. Then you have other Muslims, no, they're on the other side of the extreme. Everything is what? Everything is haram. Can't do this, can't do that. But where? Where does it say it's haram? Don't ask that question. What do you mean where? What do you mean why? Don't ask these questions. This is how it is. So this first type of why, extremely important for us to ask this. And we explained yesterday that you and I, we have our own 9 to 5, yes? But there is someone who is asking this question on your behalf, and that is your marja. That's what a marja does. When someone comes and says, you know what, this type of, transaction is haram, for example, this marja will say, why? What's the reason behind it? We need to have a reason. Even if we're going to declare it haram, we have to have a reason for it. That's why you find, for example, some issues that are not clear in the eyes and the perspective of the maraja, they withhold from giving their opinion. Because even when you want to declare something haram, you have to have reason for it. It's not just you just declare something and you move on with life. They need to have reason for it. They're asking that why on your behalf. Then we come to the second type of why. Second type of why is when you want to realize what is the wisdom, what is the philosophy, what's the scientific reason, for example, behind this act of worship that I am doing. Is it okay for me to ask this? Is it okay to ask, why do I pray 5 times a day? What type of effect does it have on my life? The answer is yes. We mentioned they used to come to Ahlul Bayt. They used to ask these questions sometimes. But here's where the discussion got a little tricky. That was this. When you go to Islamic rulings, you will find some of them, we know the reasons behind them. Some of them, they're already clear. Some of them, Ahlul Bayt have told us. Some of them, science is now starting to shed a little bit of light on them. Then you have a fourth category that we said yesterday is greater than 1, 2, and 3 put together. That is the detailed rulings that we have in Islam. This prayer, hundreds of rulings go into it. I know you and I just pray because we're used to it. But actually, if you have someone who's new to the religion, try explaining it to them. Initially, it's a bit difficult, right? You have to learn all these details. You can't talk, you can't walk, right? You can't chew on gum, you can't do this, you can't do that. There's all these rulings. Do we know the reason behind every single one of these? No. The majority of these detailed rulings in Islam, we don't know them. If you ever think we know the reasons behind all of these, please give me a call. Because I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of detailed rulings. I don't know what the reason is behind them. I would love to know what the reason is behind them. Yes? This is just salat, fasting. You look at fasting, there are sins that are very, very great, but they will not break your fast from a jurisprudential perspective. Yes? There are sins that are smaller, they will break your fast. Why? How does it work like that? It's questions. So these detailed rulings, we don't know the reasons behind them. Yes, generally, if you ask someone, what's the purpose of fasting? They will tell you the purpose of fasting is you remind yourself of the fuqara, you remember how bad it is when you're hungry, you remember the day of judgment. These are all wonderful, these are all great. But why all these details? Why if I eat something 2 minutes after Fajr, it becomes a problem? Why? I don't remember the fuqara all of a sudden? I'm still going to be just as hungry. But you go to any majlis, you'll say that fast is not accepted, right? But why? It's all these detailed rulings. Inheritance, all these details. We get 1/3, 1/5, 1/6, 1/8, 1/20th sometimes. Why? We don't know the reasons behind all of these detailed rulings. And yesterday we said it almost seems as though Quran and Ahlul Bayt did not want to tell us the reasons behind all of these rulings. So inshallah tonight, we're going to continue with this topic and we'll inshallah try to answer these 5 questions. Number 1, and this is the most important of all, why hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us the reason behind every single Islamic ruling? Couldn't He have sent down with every ruling the reason with it as well? The scientific fact behind it, the wisdom behind it, the philosophy behind it. Wouldn't have that made faith so much easier for you and I? That's question number 1. Question number 2, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ask the Muslimin to pray towards Jerusalem for 13 years of the prophethood of the Prophet? What's the wisdom behind this? Question number 3, how are some rulings in Islam legislated for the whole community and they are not legislated for an individual basis? Number 4, why is it that there are certain types of music that I might listen to, you might listen to, supposedly you hear it somewhere, you might think that this music doesn't seem to have any negative effect on you. But somehow, some way, the marja has categorically declared this type of music to be haram. Why is that? And number 5, and finally, is it possible that some rulings that we even know the reason behind them could possibly have other reasons as well, meaning that the reason that was presented to us by Ahlul Bayt was one of the reasons behind the hurma, one of the reasons behind the wujub. Could there have been other reasons for this ruling as well? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with Allah salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So we start from here. Someone says, well, you know what? Sometimes you'll hear answers like this, and it's not a terrible answer, but we'll discuss it. Someone says, you know what, Sheikh, the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could not have told us the reasons behind everything is because, well, this Quran would have gone from 6,000 verses. It would have turned into 6 million verses. It would have been too big. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the reason behind everything, just telling you what to do. This doesn't seem like the greatest response, but, maybe, okay. Okay, the Quran we can do. What about Ahlul Bayt? Ahlul Bayt, they could have mentioned all this. Say, no, Ahlul Bayt, people didn't ask them these questions. Yes, they opened the door. People didn't come and ask these questions. Maybe that is true, but they knew that people would come afterwards. They knew people would come later on with a deeper understanding of the religion. Why didn't they mention it for the people later? When you look at hadith, there are a hadith that the people of the time of the Prophet and the time of the Ahlul Bayt could not fully understand these ahadith. But Ahlul Bayt say it anyways because there are people who come later who have a deeper understanding of things. In fact, not just hadith we have, this Quran, some verses of the Quran, hadith says that some verses of the Quran are revealed. The people of the end of times will have a deeper understanding of these verses of the Quran. Couldn't have Ahlul Bayt done the same thing? Explain all of these things. Okay, people don't understand then. Maybe in the 30th century, 21st century, I don't know, whatever century, people come, they understand what they're saying. It seems as though on purpose they did not want to explain the reason behind every single Islamic ruling. But what is the reason for that? Why not do that? And I'm going to mention 2 reasons. The first is going to break down into a number of reasons on its own. The first reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may not have shared the reasons behind every Islamic ruling, the wisdom, the philosophy, the benefit of it, is because at times, even if He were to share the reason with us, we would not accept it from Him. We would reject it. Say, no, that's not possible. If only he had told me. If only he had told me why this wudu has to be done this way. If only he had told me why the time of salat is so important. I always accept whatever he has to say. You know why I say this so confidently? That even if he were to share the reasons with us, we would not take it from him. Because sometimes he's already done this and we don't take it from him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I created this mankind. There's man and woman. These two are two genders. Yes? They are different from one another. Because of the differences that I have placed in them, they have different responsibilities. This one is tasked with not drawing attention to herself. That's her main task. This one is tasked with not paying attention to things that he's not supposed to pay attention to. They have different responsibilities as their major tasks. Yes, the clothing, the rules of clothing, they apply to men and women, yes, in Islam. But of course, as it relates to women, it's heavier on that side, yes? As it relates to lowering the gaze, this is heavier on the men's side. It says these are different. They have different rules and responsibilities. But you and I sit there and say, I don't think that's good enough of a reason. No, they're the same. And you're like, this is God. He's the one who created us. He's saying we're different. But you and I sit there and say, no, I don't think you know, it's not good enough of a reason. He's already told us some of these. We don't take it from him. Then you and I sit there and say, why didn't he tell us the rest? So he tell you the rest. There's no guarantee you'll take any of it from him. He said, I'll share a story with you and just put this into perspective, yes? Where someone has full knowledge of something, he gives his opinion. Someone else has no knowledge of that subject matter, but he sits there very confidently, says, I don't think this is good enough of a reason. Yeah? I remember in Iran, this was almost, 7, 8 years ago. I was studying in the house, and of course, you get into taxis, right? Not everyone has cars over there. It's very different from this part of the world, right? So I got in a cab. I was going somewhere. And I don't know, somehow this person found out that I did not grow up there, right? And that I spoke English. So along this ride, as we were going, he asked me, he said, well, why don't you say a couple words or a sentence or, something like that. So usually when they tell you to do that, I don't know what, I couldn't think of anything. So I said, why don't you tell me? Like, tell me something, I'll say it in English. He said, okay, say, for example, like I'm in the car, we're going over there. I said, okay, no problem. I said, we're in the car, we're going, to this place. Then when I said this, with all of the boldness in the world, he looked back, sitting in the back. He looked back at me. He said, you have to work on your accents. Your accent is not up to standards, yes. No one's accent is perfect, but this brother is not the one to judge. So he could barely say a couple of words. And yet here I am speaking the language that I learned, growing up. And he's like, no, your accent has some issues. This is how it is with Allah. He's the one who created us. Says, you guys are different. I said, no, I don't think so. It's not good enough of a reason. And there are reasons why we will not accept the reasons that he might share with us. And I want to break this down. Recite salawat, please. The first reason why at times we may not fully understand why he is asking us to do what he is asking us to do is because the reason for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simply to test your obedience. But if he were to tell that to us, we say, this reason is not enough. No, tell me there's some scientific fact. If I pray towards Qibla, don't say I'm just testing your obedience. No, tell me some cool, reason. Oh, you connect, there's an energy, it's magnetic energy, it comes from there. You connect to this and then this happens, for example. We want these types of answers, yes? No, sometimes the reason is just because he wants to see whether you'll listen or not. And this has happened in Islamic history. Because when you look at the life of the Prophet, multiple years he was in Mecca, 13 years is the mainstream opinion. Then 10 years he moved to Medina. These 13 years that the Prophet was in Mecca, interestingly enough, he was not praying towards the Kaaba. He's in Mecca. He's praying towards Jerusalem and Baytul Muqaddas. Yes, and Masjid al-Aqsa. And they used to call it Al-Masjid al-Aqsa because it was so far away. Aqsa means the furthest. So far away, they say Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay. They used to pray towards Masjid al-Aqsa. What happened? The Jews, especially when the Muslimin came to Medina, because Medina was a stronghold for the Jewish community. When they came to Medina, they started to mock the Prophet. They said, this Muhammad says he has a religion of his own. He comes here, he's copying us. He's praying towards our temple, and half the stories he talks about is like our stories, yes? They started to mock the Muslimin. And the Quran says that the Prophet used to go out at night and he used to look at the skies, awaiting the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, awaiting some way out of this situation. He was waiting for it. And the Quran says, we see you at night, you come, and you start looking, and you are looking for an answer to this issue. So a couple years, maybe a year or two after the Prophet had come into Medina, then according to some narrations, during Dhuhr Salat, some say Asr Salat, all of a sudden the Qibla changed. And if you look at the difference, it's a big difference. Because if you're in Medina and you are going to pray towards Mecca now versus Jerusalem, Mecca is to the south of where you are. And Jerusalem is to the north of where you are. This is, 180 degrees change almost. It's a big difference. Okay. Now there's two questions to be asked here. Why are they switching now? And what was the reason that they were praying towards Jerusalem for 13 years? There's two questions to be asked. The first question is very clear to the Muslimin. They wanted their own identity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw what the Prophet was going through, what his message was going through. He changed the Qibla. Okay, wonderful. Changed the Qibla. Switching towards Mecca makes sense. You don't even need to work too hard to figure that out. But the question is, why did it take 13 years? If you were going to switch to Mecca, why 13 years you're praying towards Jerusalem? If you think about it, to put it into perspective, the prophets of Allah has prayed more towards Jerusalem in his life than he's ever prayed towards Mecca. If you think about it, he prayed more towards Jerusalem. Why? Why 13 years you're telling people to pray towards Jerusalem? Just go to Mecca. From the beginning, you say identity, the Prophet was going through a rough time. Okay, from the beginning, just switch to Mecca. Why Jerusalem for 13 years? These are those verses I recited at the beginning. Surah Al-Baqarah. It says, سَيَقُولُ السُّفَهَاءُ مِنَ النَّاسِ مَا وَلَّاهُمْ عَنْ قِبْلَتِهِمُ الَّتِي كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ. The people who are ignorant, they'll sit there and they'll say, what's going on with this? Why are they changing qiblas? They don't understand. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, he says, tell them, whichever direction you want to face, just based on our command. And then the verse continues. It says, Ya Rasulullah, the reason why we kept you on Jerusalem for 13 years, you remember the qibla you used to be upon? We only did it إِلَّا لِنَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَتَّبِعُ الرَّسُولِ مِمَّنْ يَنْقَلِبُ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ. We just wanted to see who is going to obey the Prophet, even though it's difficult to face Jerusalem. We wanted to see who's obedience. No, Ya Allah, give me a better reason. Jerusalem, magnetic power. Give me some of that stuff. That's what we want to hear. He says, no, I did this because I wanted to test, and it was a difficult test. It's a difficult test. He says, I wanted to see who's really following the Prophet, who's not. This is the first reason why. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to tell us some of these, we would belittle the reasons that he has. Na'udhu billah. We look for a better reason. This is the first reason why we won't accept the reasons that he would share with us. Recite salawat, please. Moving on to number two. Number two is this. Sometimes the reason why we struggle to understand these reasons behind these rulings is because the ruling is set for the community as a whole. It is not set for every single individual. Meaning that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to legislate this ruling, he looks at the community, says thousands of Muslims. If I declare this act to be halal, out of these thousands of Muslims, 50, 60, 70% of them, it's going to ruin their lives. It's going to create problems in their lives. But it's not individual based, meaning that might be also some who might engage with this deed and it may not necessarily ruin their whole life. But he legislates the ruling for what? For the community. Because most people who do engage with it, what will happen to them? It will ruin their life. And you're sitting there and you say, well, when I engage with this, it doesn't have a negative effect on me. Even if we assume that, that's an assumption, by the way, yes? But even if we were to assume that, the ruling is based on the community. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees, if this thing makes its way into the community, 60, 70%, 80%, they will be negatively affected by this. A good example of this is the rulings that we have when it comes to wine. You know, these intoxicants that we have. You find the emphasis Islam has on this issue. It says you can't, number one, you can't drink, of course, that's we already know. You can't even sit at a table where others are drinking. Say, Ya Allah, it doesn't negatively affect me. They're drinking. I control myself. Let's assume you're able to do that. Assumption. Yes, it's an assumption. Let's assume. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at the community. Says, if this alcohol makes its way into the tables, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80% will eventually, they will engage with this. Therefore, I'm going to legislate a ruling for the community. Categorically, I do not want this to be on your tables. Recite a salawat, please. Categorically, I don't even want this to be around you. You can't attend a gathering where people are drinking. Yes, there's times where you have to attend because of your work. Those are extreme scenarios. Yes, those are exceptions we're talking about. The general ruling is that you're not allowed to attend. Say, but I attend, but it doesn't negatively affect me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just not looking just at you. He's legislating these rulings for millions of Muslims. And when he looks at those millions of Muslims, he doesn't want them to even be engaging with such a thing. Because it may not negatively affect every single individual. But if you look at 100 individuals, 50, 60, 70%, whatever the percentage you want to come up with, it can negatively affect them. You look at the rules of gambling and betting, for example. In Islam, there are two rulings. In our Maraji have rulings on this issue. They say, well, you can't gamble and you can't bet. That we already know. But then they also say, you know, those things that people use predominantly for gambling and betting. He says you can't play those games. You can't use those things even if you're not gambling and betting. Some of our Maraji have this fatwa. Others, they say ihtiyat wajib. It's an obligatory precaution. You're not supposed to be doing this. Why? It's not negatively affecting me. The game is there. I'm not playing that same game these guys play with it. It's a different game. I don't even want this in your community. I don't even want this in your hands. Because if it makes its way into your hands, what happens? 60, 70, 80, they will engage with it. Maybe not 100 out of 100, but he's looking at the community. But are these reasons good enough for us? No. So we look at it with our own limited knowledge. Music is another example. The music that is declared haram by Rastani, for example. It's music that's used in haram gatherings. But Sheikh, it's music, I listen to it, doesn't have a negative effect on me. Let's assume that's the case. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even want this in this community. Therefore, he categorically says, this is haram. Even if you assume that it doesn't negatively affect you per se, I don't want it to even be part of your lifestyle. Therefore, we're going to remove it altogether. Because if it were to be part of your lifestyle, most of the community then, they would engage with it. Most of the community then would negatively be affected by it. These are rulings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has his infinite wisdom behind it. You and I just looking at our own little situation, we want to draw rulings based on it. This is the second reason. Moving on to the third reason. Sometimes the reason that's mentioned in hadith for an Islamic ruling is only one reason for it. There can be multiple reasons for it. Unless Ahlul Bayt say this is the only reason for it, you and I can't assume that that is the only reason. Say pork. Pork is haram to eat. Why? Because there's bacteria in it. Okay, so we sanitized it. We took care of the health problems. By the way, some of these claims we make, sometimes, not always, sometimes these claims we make, well, this is bad for you. This is why Islam made it haram. Then you look at it scientifically, it doesn't always match up with the claims we make. Sometimes it does. You know, sometimes we don't research the topic properly. We just make claims. Yes? Or you can't have this, for example, because it's a bottom feeder. Well, in Islam, there are other things that are haram to eat that are not bottom feeders. But sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a reason. He might even share that reason with us, but it's one of the reasons why this deed has become haram. A good example of this is when you break your salats while you are traveling. You break your salat while you're traveling. An interesting thing about this example is even if you didn't want to, you have to. Yes? The Prophet had arguments with this about his companions. When they were heading out for the Battle of Badr, what happened? Some of them would not do qasr. Some of them wanted to continue to do their tamam. And the Prophet struggled with this. He really had to push them to get them to do qasr. And he did qasr himself. He said, I'm doing qasr. Why wouldn't you do qasr? Okay, so when you travel, you have to do qasr. It's not like you have an option. But you and I sit there and say, yes, qasr, you do qasr because you're traveling. Traveling is difficult. Okay, but now you go on trips. It's a 30-minute trip with an airplane. Is that a difficult trip? No, it's easier than getting in the car and going. And yet, your salat is definitely still qasr. So what happened here? So maybe this is one of the reasons. And this is why it's very important for us that when we connect science to religion, we always put a maybe there. Science is shedding light on this deed, for example, creates these problems in your life. Say, maybe this is the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it haram. Maybe this is the reason why. Otherwise, you'll be surprised how often science changes its mind. I remember when I was 15, I was reading hadith. This hadith said, it's good for you to eat twice a day. And at that time, this is 10, 15 years ago, flies in the face of what people say at that time. Because the predominant voice at that time, nutritionists, was no, you're supposed to break down your meals so that you keep your metabolism running throughout the day. Don't ever let your metabolism drop. Always keep it high. If you have 3 meals, make it 6. Break it down into 6. I don't know if you remember, but this was the predominant perspective back in the day. I remember sitting there, but this hadith, multiple hadiths say something else though. So confused. Then you grow up a little bit later, then they say, no. There's this thing, it's called, intermittent fasting. Even if you eat, instead of going from 3, you should go to 1 if you can. It's completely the exact opposite of what we used to hear. Yes? Of course, there are different opinions about these topics, very different opinions, but predominantly, this is what you're hearing nowadays, yes? That no, the more you hold back from the food from the body, this actually helps your metabolism. Science changes its mind all the time. So when I connect Islam to science, I have to throw a maybe in there. Because you never know, maybe tomorrow science changes its mind. Number 1. Number 2, I say maybe this is one of the reasons. One of the reasons. We don't know all the reasons. The pork is haram. I sanitize it. Maybe there's 20 other reasons why it's haram. You can't just jump to these conclusions and make these assumptions. These are the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if He were to share these rulings with us, we would not necessarily take it from Him. Moving on to the second reason. The second reason is one that I really want to emphasize on. Because yesterday we said that a person who approaches Islam with the perspective of tell me why, and if you don't tell me why, I'm not going to practice it. We said this person can never practice Islam. Never. Because there are thousands of rulings. We don't know the details behind them. So the second reason that I'm mentioning is a very, very critical one. And if you understand this properly, you will understand that if Islam were to tell you and I the reason behind every single Islamic ruling, technically, in some ways, it would not even be a religion. Why? How so? Say, what's the point of religion? What's the point of these duties? It's for your faith to grow, your iman to grow, your belief to grow. These words we use, right? Iman, faith, belief. This is the one line I want you to understand. Anytime you speak about iman, faith, belief, there is always an element of the unseen in this process. An element of the unseen. An element that you can't see necessarily with your own 2 eyes. But you have reason to believe that you should be doing this. If you go outside right now and the sun is not up, sun is down, and you come inside, imagine I went outside, I came back inside, and I said, I believe the sun is down. People laugh at you. Why? This is not belief. You just went outside and you saw it with your own two eyes. There's no unseen elements here. The proof is right in front of you. You look at it, the sun's not there. You take a microscope, you look, you see like, I don't know, bacteria. So you come back and say, I have faith that there's bacteria in here. No, you say, I saw the bacteria in it. There's no faith. Why? Because everything is very clear in front of you, just right in front of your eyes. There is no element of ghaib. There is no element of unseen. There is no unknown element in this process. Therefore, we don't even refer to it as faith and belief. It is only faith and belief when there is an unseen element in the process. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to take the reason behind every ruling and explain it to you and I, all of these unseens become seen for you. There's no more room for faith. There's no more room for belief. Well, how are you going to grow now? How are you going to trust God now? There's no room to trust Him. When you go through your science book, do you feel like you're growing spiritually? No, because you're just seeing a bunch of stuff. And it makes sense. The science, you're supposed to follow science. But you don't say, I believe, I have faith. Why? Because there's no unseen element in all of this. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about the believers, He says the believers are those الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. They believe in the unseen. That's what's special about them. They may not be able to see it with their own two eyes, but because they have reason to believe, they believe in it and they believe in it firmly. He may not be able to figure out what's the reason behind I have to pray 5 times a day. But because he has trust in Ahlul Bayt, he says they did say 5 times a day, I'm going to believe in it. See, belief has meaning here. But if that's unseen, but were to become seen for you, if you know everything, just look at it and say, yeah, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day. Why? Here's the scientific fact behind. There's no belief. There's no faith. If Islam is a religion, there has to be some elements of the unseen in it. Has to be. Otherwise, you can't grow as a human being. This is why this idea of believing in something that you don't necessarily see. When I say see, not that you don't have reason to believe in it. No, you have reason to believe in it. But you may not be able to see it with your own two eyes. This is deeply embedded within Islam. Why is it that someone like Fir'aun, in the final moments of his life, when he was leaving this world, he said, now I believe. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, this belief isn't worth anything. But see, he's saying, I believe now. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, listen, all the unseens that we told you, they're becoming seen for you now. They're becoming apparent for you now. So your belief went out of the picture now. There's no more room for faith. Faith is when you can't see it with your own two eyes. Yes, everyone, when they see the punishment on the day of judgment with their own two eyes, becomes a good person. Everyone. The Quran says the kuffar mushrikeen, they stand there, they put their heads down. They can't even look at that punishment. But it's when it's unseen, will they believe in it? Yes? And this idea of believing in the unseen has been given a lot of value in Islam. And this is why they say our beloved Prophet, Muhammad ibn Mustafa, the narration says the Prophet was sitting there one day and he turned to his companions and he said, I miss my brothers and sisters. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, you don't have brothers and sisters. Who are these brothers and sisters you're referring to? He said, no, I have brothers. He said, who are these brothers then? He said, my brothers and sisters are those who will come later. They will never see me, but they will believe in me. That's you and I. He said, there are those, they will come later. They will never see Muhammad walking in front of them. They will believe in Muhammad. This is extremely, extremely valuable. Why? Because there's an element of the unseen in it. And you and I are sitting there and say, why is there everything unseen? No, show me everything. Show you everything. There's no more faith. There's no more room for belief at that point. Yes? This is why the hadith beautifully says, and with this I will wrap up. The hadith beautifully says, the Imam says, you know what? We are patient. We Ahlul Bayt are patient. وَالشِّيعَةُنَا أَصْبَرُ مِنَّا. And our Shia, from one perspective, they're more patient than us. From one perspective. Of course, like anybody else, I have the same question. What does this mean? They're more patient. How's that even possible from this perspective? He said, وَالشِّيَعَةُ أَصْبَرُ مِنْهُمْ. Why, Ya Ibn Rasulullah? He said, they're more patient because when things happen, many times we know the reason that they're happening. We know what's happening behind the scenes. We can see where this event is leading to. But when things happen in the lives of our Shia, they don't have that knowledge. There's curtains. They can't see behind the scenes. And if they still submit themselves and they still believe, they still have that faith, they're so patient with the difficulty that they're going through, even though they can't see how this is possibly in their best interest, this is the ultimate faith. This is the ultimate belief. So we have to be careful not to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take every unseen in this religion and turn it into the seen, because then this faith and this belief would not have any room at all. With that, inshallah, we'll bring an end to tonight's talk. If we can, inshallah, dim the lights, we'll prepare to take our hearts to the city of Kufa to prepare ourselves to mourn with the Ahlul Bayt during these days and nights that the Ahlul Bayt are going through. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya Ibn Rasulullah. Amongst these masa'ib that took place in the land of Karbala, there are many. But then when the land of Karbala came to an end and this caravan of the women and the children, they started to walk away from Karbala, or should I say they started to be dragged away from the plains of Karbala, then the masa'ib just continued and continued. These masa'ib went on for so long that the likes of Imam al-Sajjad, he was gharib his whole life. Imagine now this caravan, they say they waited a day afterwards, they started to drag this caravan away from the plains of Karbala. The narration says some of these women and children, they didn't want to leave the plains of Karbala. They were forced out of the plains of Karbala. Many of them wanted to stay with the bodies of the shuhada. And the heads of these shuhada, they are sent ahead. And the narration says one of those individuals who was carrying the head of Abu Abdullah, he brought this head into his own house. And he hid the head in his own house. The narration says his wife came into the house and he asked him, he said, "Where have you been?" He said, "I was in Karbala and I have brought for you something that we can get so much money in return of. You won't have to worry about money for the rest of your life." And this wife of his asked him, he said, "What is this that you're talking about?" He said, "I have brought for you the head of the son of Fatima. It is so valuable. If you give it to anyone, it is worth millions of dirham and dananir. You won't have to ever worry about this money." And she says, "I immediately left the house and I told him I would never live my life with you for another second." She says, "I left the house and I saw a light was emanating from this house and the head of Abu Abdullah." Imagine as they bring the head of Imam al-Hussein into Kufa. Imagine as they bring this caravan into Kufa. These moments, these scenes were extremely painful for the Ahlul Bayt. The disrespect, the dishonor that was shown towards the Ahlul Bayt. They say they kept the Ahlul Bayt out in the outskirts of the city for one night, just to prepare the city for a celebration, just to adorn the city, to prepare the city so that when they bring these women and children into the city, that people would be celebrating. They say they brought these women and children into the city of Kufa, and all of these women in the city of Kufa, they are celebrating. Many of them are clapping. Some of them are throwing stones towards the women and children of Ahlul Bayt. And this continued until they say some of these women and children, they saw these women and children that are walking in this caravan, they're different. They don't look normal. They say they approached them, they asked them, they said, "Which captives are you? Which family do you come from?" They said, "We are from the family of Muhammad. We are the children of Muhammad. We are the women and children of Muhammad." The narration says this scene was so painful. Some of the women, they came from the top of the houses. They came down. They started to offer clothing to them. They started to offer food to them. They started to offer water to them. Now the whole scene in Kufa started to change. The whole scene in Kufa. Everyone now starts to cry. Hazlam ibn Sutayr says, "I was in Kufa. They brought this caravan of the women and children Before you know it, all the women and children, they were crying. And then they brought in this man. He was on this camel, and this camel had nothing to sit on. And they brought this camel in, and I saw that this man has chains on him, and he can barely move. I looked closer. I saw this is Ali ibn al-Hussein. This is the son of Imam al-Hussein. They're bringing him into Kufa. And he says, I saw Imam al-Sajjad as they brought him into Kufa. He was saying while he saw the people crying, he said, why are you crying? You are the ones who killed us. Your men are the ones who massacred us in Karbala. He says he could barely get his voice out. His voice was very weak because of how weak his body had become, because of this difficult journey that he had been on. Why are the women and the children of Ahlul Bayt in the States? Why are the women and the children of the Ahlul Bayt being paraded through the city of Kufa? Because they don't have their flag bearer with them. They don't have Abu al-Fadl Abbas with them. If they had their brother Abbas with them, none of this would have happened. Maybe some of these women and children, as they're walking through the city of Kufa, they might be thinking to themselves, if Abbas was here with us, none of this would have happened. But what happened to this flag bearer? What happened to Abu al-Fadl Abbas? On the 10th of Muharram, they say after many of the companions went towards the battlefield, then Abu al-Fadl Abbas made his way towards the tent of Hussein. Imagine the pain that went through the heart of Hussein when he saw Abu al-Fadl Abbas, because he knows why Abbas has come. And Abbas turned towards Hussein. He said, Hussein, my heart can't take this pain anymore. I've watched Ali al-Akbar go towards the battlefield and come back. I watched Qasim ibn al-Hassan go and come back. I watched Aoun and Muhammad go and come back. I can't take it anymore. This pain is killing me. Would you give me permission to go? And they say Hussein started to cry. The tears started to fall from his face. He said, brother, you're my flag bearer. The moment you leave, this whole army of mine, it will fall apart. I don't have anyone after you. The moment you go, everything is going to fall apart at this point. And Abbas is standing there, and Hussein is standing there. They don't know what to say to one another. Until he turned to Abbas, he said, you hear this cry, al-atash, al-atash. Go get some water at least. Go and bring a little bit of water for them at least. They say Abbas came back to his tent. He rode his horse, and he grabbed with him a spear, and he grabbed with him a qirba, a mashk, and he heads out towards this ocean of an army. And he starts to fight with this army, and you can tell that this army is afraid of Abbas. This path starts to open up towards Furat until Abu al-Fadl Abbas, he gets to Furat, and he grabs some water, but only if Abbas knew what they had prepared for him. On the way back towards the tents, hundreds of archers waiting, and all of a sudden Abbas sees these arrows coming towards him, and all of a sudden the narration says that they cut off his right arm, and he continued on his path, and they cut off his left arm, and the arrows now come and hit his body. And Abbas took many arrows on the 10th of Muharram, but there was one arrow that broke the hearts of Abbas. There was one arrow that was the most painful arrow Abbas ever took on the 10th of Muharram. This arrow didn't even hit his body. This was the arrow that hit the mashk. The moment this arrow came and hit the mashk, this water started to drip away in front of Abbas. The narration says, Abbas didn't know which direction to go now. Does he go back to Furat, or does he go back to the tents? What is he going to go back to the tents with if he has no water to present to these children? And in this while, and in this means, then all of a sudden someone struck Abbas on the head. And he fell on the ground, and he called out, Ya akha, adrik akha. He said, come, your brother is on the ground. Imagine how quickly Hussein ran into the battlefield. Imagine what Hussein was saying in those final moments when he was sitting by the body of Abu al-Fadl Abbas. Maybe he started to move some of this blood aside. Maybe he started to take away some of these arrows. We don't know exactly what they said. All we know is that when Hussein started to come back towards the tents, he said, Al-an inqata zahri. He said, now my back is broken. This was that final step. I can't take this pain anymore. The narration says Hussein slowly made his way back to the tents. And all he did, he took the column of the tent of Abbas. He pulled this column, and this tent fell on the ground. And these women and children immediately realized the time of captivity, the time of Kufa and Sham has now come. The time of disrespect and dishonor has now come. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the tawfiq to be amongst the true followers of the Ahlul Bayt, inshaAllah. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He hastens the return of our beloved 12th Imam, bin Nabi wa alih. رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Inshallah, it's time for Salat, so we'll do the Adhan inside, but we're going to pray Salat outside, so please make preparations to do Salat outside, inshallah.